How did a fractured, plague-ridden continent rise to conquer the globe? To find the answer, we must first travel back to Europe's darkest hour. Imagine stepping out of a time machine into the aftermath of 476 AD. The majestic Roman Empire has crumbled, its unified territories violently partitioned by warring Germanic tribes. The Visigoths claiming Spain, the Lombards seizing Italy, the Franks dominating Gaul, and the Anglo-Saxons settling Britain. It was an era of ceaseless bloodshed, compounded by the harsh social control of the Catholic Church. Then came the ultimate devastating blow, the Black Death, a pandemic that mercilessly eradicated over half of Europe's population. It was an era so grim, it seemed completely devoid of hope. But history has a strange way of transforming profound despair into unparalleled brilliance. Just as the darkness seemed absolute, a revolution of the mind began to sweep across the continent. Suddenly, the world was gifted with Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, Michelangelo's awe-inspiring Sistine Chapel, and Copernicus's universe-altering astronomical theories. This was the Renaissance, a cultural and intellectual detonation. It was not just a chapter in a history book. It was the definitive turning point that dragged Europe out of the shadows, arming it with the art, science, and philosophy needed to dominate the world for centuries to come. To understand the sheer magnitude of this explosion, you have to realize what it was up against. For centuries, the Catholic Church had risen as the ultimate, unquestioned power, dictating not just the political and economic landscape, but the very spirit of the people. Intellectual development was effectively frozen in time. Brilliant, divergent minds who dared to question the established narrative, men like Galileo and Copernicus, were branded heretics and faced brutal punishment. Yet, you cannot suppress human curiosity forever. Right in the shadows of this immense control, the seeds of progress were quietly taking root. Starting in Italy, the former heart of the Roman Empire, in the 14th century, this movement gradually swept across the continent, evolving into a comprehensive revolution. This wasn't merely a nostalgic revival of classical Greek and Roman aesthetics. It was a radical turning point in how humans perceived themselves and their place in the universe. If the Dark Ages were defined by chaos and rigid conservatism, the Renaissance was the ultimate liberation. It was an era that placed personal development, humanistic values, and raw intellect dead center. Philosophers and thinkers began to glorify humanity, elevating the freedom to create and the sheer will to decode the world through logic, reason, and science. This return of the light of knowledge laid the bedrock for innovations that would shatter the old world order. In the cutthroat realms of philosophy and politics, heavyweights like Erasmus, Thomas More, and Niccolo Machiavelli left profound legacies. With his masterpiece, The Prince, Machiavelli stripped away traditional illusions, delivering a ruthless, pragmatic new perspective on power and leadership. But this era didn't stop at ideas. The Renaissance fueled a relentless drive to explore the unknown, triggering a wave of world-altering expeditions. Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas, Vasco da Gama cracked the sea route to India, and Ferdinand Magellan's expedition successfully circumnavigated the globe. These journeys did more than just expand the map. They forcefully injected Europe with the wealth, resources, and radical new ideas of entirely different civilizations. This explosive cultural awakening wasn't just a springboard for art and philosophy. It was the ultimate catalyst that catapulted humanity toward its next monumental leap, the Industrial Revolution. For centuries, European society had been suffocated by strict religious dogmas and conservative thought. The Renaissance blew through like a hurricane, liberating the human imagination. Giants of this era, from artistic visionaries like Michelangelo to scientific pioneers like Galileo and Francis Bacon, shared one defining trait: an absolute refusal to accept known limits. That exact spirit of defiance became the guiding fire for the inventors of the following centuries. It paved the way for minds like James Watt, who unleashed the power of the steam engine, and Richard Arkwright, who birthed the modern factory system. The way humans understood the natural world was permanently fractured and rebuilt. Visionaries like Copernicus, Galileo, and Johannes Kepler didn't just map the stars, they forged the scientific method itself. This rigorous new standard of research became a formidable tool. It was the intellectual DNA inherited by Isaac Newton, whose groundbreaking principles of mechanics transformed abstract physics into the gears and pistons of complex machinery. Driven by the massive wealth pouring in from newly discovered global trade routes, the demand for mass-produced goods skyrocketed. This insatiable demand fueled a frenzy of technological innovation, laying the concrete foundations for the industrial behemoths and mechanized factories of the modern age. But this glorious era of scientific and technological triumph had a darker, more aggressive counterpart: global expansion. As science and commerce collided, a powerful new elite emerged, the modern bourgeoisie. Their rapid ascent ignited an endless hunger for resources that the small, depleted landmass of Europe simply could not feed. To sustain their booming economies, major powers were forced to look outward, desperately seeking gold, silver, spices, and slaves from uncharted territories. This relentless drive birthed the brutal, sprawling era of worldwide European colonialism. Armed with cutting-edge maritime breakthroughs, the magnetic compass, highly detailed maps, and highly maneuverable ships, Europeans conquered the oceans. Explorers like Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Magellan didn't just discover new lands. They fired the starting gun for global trade and laid the groundwork for centuries of colonial conquest. The ruthless extraction of global resources flooded the old continent with unimaginable wealth. But this prosperity came at a devastating cost. The indigenous populations of the Americas, Africa, and Asia endured merciless exploitation, violently stripped of their sovereignty and ancient cultures. Back on European soil, this surging capitalist class aggressively dismantled the old feudal system, replacing it with a market-driven society obsessed with industry and continuous innovation. Yet, this transformation was a double-edged sword that carried severe consequences. It is a striking irony that the Renaissance, the very era that united Europe in a brilliant revival of literature, science, and art, also planted the deepest seeds of its future division. As nations broke free from the psychological and political chokehold of the Catholic Church, the idea of the sovereign nation-state began to burn brightly. Stripping away the clergy's power over secular governance, these new states built their foundations on distinct, fiercely guarded national identities. Take Germany, for instance, shows that by 1813, Prussian King Frederick William III deliberately weaponized the national spirit in his ruling policies. To guarantee absolute loyalty and ignite a fierce fighting will in newly annexed territories, this calculated nationalism was injected into the daily lives of every family and community. It permanently forged the modern German identity and unknowingly set the stage for the devastating global conflicts to come. This fierce national pride soon bred a dangerous resentment. Despite their deep cultural heritage, the Germans found themselves eclipsed by the sprawling global empires of Britain and France. Driven into a corner in the era of geographical expansion, Germany desperately scrambled to carve out its own space on the international map. This relentless competition for colonial supremacy turned Europe into a geopolitical powder keg, ultimately detonating into the catastrophic First World War. But the nightmare didn't end there. The bruised national spirit twisted into something far more extreme, weaponizing German identity to ignite the even more devastating Second World War, a conflict that left behind unimaginable pain and ruin. Yet, from this unprecedented slaughter emerged a terrifying byproduct, a hyper-accelerated leap in military science. Groundbreaking innovations in physics, chemistry, and mechanics birthed advanced modern weaponry, ensuring that future warfare would be exponentially deadlier. The Renaissance may have been the magnificent launchpad for Europe's global supremacy, but history is ruthlessly bound by one ironclad law: every golden age must eventually face its twilight. After dominating the planet for centuries, the modern, civilized European empire is now exposing its deep structural fractures. Bled dry and devastated by 2 world wars, Europe was forced to surrender its global monopoly to the United States in the latter half of the 20th century. For decades, European values were blindly accepted as the global gold standard, but today, that absolute authority is under siege from every corner of the globe. Enter the new global titans: China, fueled by soaring ambition, is aggressively reclaiming its historical dominance on the world stage. Teaming up with Russia, they are empowering the BRICS bloc to actively dismantle and reshape a world order they view as unfairly rigged by Western powers. Even smaller nations refuse to be pawns anymore. ASEAN has emerged as a formidable collective, fiercely establishing its own rules of engagement to navigate the lethal geopolitical crossfire between the US and China. If major powers want to operate in their arena, they must accept ASEAN's terms. It's a stunning historical reversal. Regions that once suffered under the European colonial boot have rapidly evolved into powerful, independent economic juggernauts. Meanwhile, the former master of the world is suffocating under the weight of its own internal crises. The European Union, once a beacon of unshakable unity, is increasingly paralyzed by political friction. The brutal public debt crisis of the 2000s sent shockwaves through the financial bedrock of the EU, violently crippling southern nations like Greece and Italy. Today, while the US and China surge ahead, Europe's economic recovery crawls. Its manufacturing sector is being heavily battered by a relentless tsunami of cheap Chinese goods, while a rapidly aging population and a severe shortage of young labor act as a ticking demographic time bomb. Once hailed as the ultimate promised land for millions of global immigrants, Europe is now a cauldron of social and cultural friction. Massive waves of migration from the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia have fundamentally transformed the continent's demographic makeup, but they have also ignited fierce societal tensions. The terrifying threat of terrorism, coupled with surging xenophobia and militant anti-immigrant movements, has deeply fractured European society. The unbreakable solidarity that once defined the region is actively crumbling. Most terrifying of all, the long-banished specter of war has returned to European soil. The explosion of the Ukraine conflict in 2022 has created an intensely volatile and unpredictable geopolitical landscape, sending shockwaves across neighboring borders. These compounding pressures are dragging Europe into a profound political abyss, painfully visible in the sudden collapse of leading governments across the continent. The ultimate question now stands: can Europe adapt and redefine its identity in the modern world, or will it be swallowed by history? No empire rules from the top forever, but a decline is not necessarily a death sentence. Europe remains a heavyweight champion of culture, intellect, and diplomacy. If it can survive this brutal gauntlet of modern crises, it won't reclaim its absolute monopoly, but it can absolutely secure its position in a world it no longer controls.